it is basically focused on how the role of interpreters in natural disasters, in natural catastrophes, okay? This little part of the research was focused mainly in the cultural aspect, of the interpreter, okay? How the culture can be a barrier or not in the...
Richards is first.
I'm sorry, everyone. Sorry, Yos. Can I ask everybody, please, to turn off your microphones? Turn off your microphones and your cameras so we can hear the speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, the idea of this part of the research is to find out whether the cultural aspect has an impact or not in the correct transmission of the message in this kind of situations, okay? We are leaving aside the educational factor, okay? We are not going to focus whether the interpreters are being or have some kind of background in these roles, or if they are just ad hoc, okay? So we're just going to focus in the cultural aspect, okay? This was an interview, oh, sorry, let me share my screen. This was an interview I did to a wonderful professional, I don't know if you can see it now, to a wonderful professional. His name is Dr. Garcia Nevares, Luis Garcia Nevares. He's from Puerto Rico. Since we are going to focus in the Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico, so I found his contact and I got to talk to him. So it was just one interview, I mean, one subject for the interview. And okay, I think we can begin now. The main idea of studying this is because since the beginning of the 21st century, the number of Caribbean and Latin America who have been affected by natural disaster has risen to 152 million. When these catastrophes have impacts that exceed local capacity, the request for external assistance at national and international level is absolutely necessary, with language and sometimes cultural often being a barrier. Consequently, the presence of translators and interpreters becomes mandatory. It's a must in most of the cases, especially if the international help is required. Then, of course, there is a question that arises beyond the professional preparation received or not on behalf of the humanitarian interpreter in cases of natural emergencies. To what extent the cultural difference influences the correct transmission of a message in these situations? As I said before, I got to talk to Dr. Garcia Nevares, and I'd like to clarify some definitions before we get to the main content, okay, which is important to have in mind. Then we have what happened, the context of Hurricane Maria, some aspects to bear in mind while doing all of this interview and while doing the analysis of the results and the conclusions I got to. The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. Peter Drucker. So some definitions, I don't know if you can see it correctly. Okay, I think it's better.
Yes, we can see it, and people can increase the size of their video as well, so we can see quite well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christiane. Okay, so some definitions I'd like to talk about first. Natural disaster. Okay, so according to Oxford dictionaries, a natural disaster is a natural event such as a flood, earthquake, or a hurricane that causes great damage or loss of life. According to the World Health Organization, a natural disaster is an act of nature of such magnitude as to create a catastrophic situation in which the day-to-day patterns of life are suddenly disrupted and people are plunged into helplessness and suffering, and as a result, need food, clothing, shelter, medical and nursing care, and other necessities of life, and protection against unfavorable environmental factors and conditions. This is according to the World Health Organization. Another concept I'd like to clarify is the crisis situations. Those kind of damages can be devastating to an area, its economy, and its people. Damage to home, businesses, and infrastructure, on top of the damage to lives, can linger for weeks, months, and sometimes even years. These situations lead to international help being required, since most of the times countries do not have the means of answering the massive emergencies on their own. Hence, different languages and cultures are involved, raising barriers that should be overthrown by interpreters and sometimes cultural mediators. And finally, according to In Zone, which is a project that is being led by the University of Geneva, a humanitarian interpreter is the act performed by interpreters working for organizations with a humanitarian mandate, such as International Committee of the Red Cross and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, among others. Humanitarian interpreters work in fragile environments where international humanitarian law, human rights, and refugee law applies. They pursue the mission of humanitarian organizations in situations of human suffering. They work with beneficiaries protected under international humanitarian law. And in this case, what matters the most for this particular study, they have no institutionalized professional community, association, or established code of professional ethics. This is very important to bear in mind because, as we all know, interpreters most of the times, or at least in this side of the world, specifically in Spain, we basically don't have an institution that can represent us, something that we can go to, or it's a little bit complicated nowadays. And we're working on that. This is part of this path. But if regular interpreters don't have these kind of institutions, even less the humanitarian interpreters, which are basically people who can help at the moment, okay? So sometimes that's why I'm leaving aside the fact of the educational factor behind, because most of the times, many of the times, interpreters who work in these natural catastrophes do not have any kind of background, because there are people who live there, who happen to live there, or who happen to be at the place, and who happen to speak 2 or more languages that can be handful. So it's important to keep that in mind, okay? Now we're gonna go to the Hurricane Maria and the facts. On the early morning of September the 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria came from Dominica, which is somewhere down here under this, as a Category 5 hurricane, and hit Puerto Rico as a Category 4, with winds over 252 kilometers per hour. It lasted all day long and most of the night as well. The damage arose up to $90 billion. The official death toll after the storm was 64, but the Puerto Rican government raised it to 4,600 after a report on storm fatalities was published in August 2018 by researchers at George Washington University. This has been by far the strongest hurricane to hit Puerto Rico in more than 80 years. It destroyed homes, it destroyed roads and bridges. Basic services such as electric power, water, and telecommunications were knocked out across the entire island and triggered heavy flooding. Residents lived through food and water shortages, water-related disease outbreaks, generators running out of fuel, hospitals and schools closed, of course, due to extensive damage, and in the immediate aftermath, a lack of access to the banking system. The methodology I pursued for this study was an interview, which I did in Hangouts, which is an application that allows video and voice as this one. And it was with Dr. Garcia Nevares. He is from Puerto Rico. He did his major in the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan, and he studied, he did his PhD in Salamanca here in Spain. He specialized in translation and cultural mediation. And while he was doing, because here in Salamanca, he did his PhD was focused mainly in translation, not in interpreting. But while he was scholarizing, while he was taking the classes, he did have some interpreting subjects, so classes. So when he received these classes, he was told to be invisible. Basically, there was two people speaking, and he was supposed to be the bridge, the communicational bridge between A and B, but he was not to be noticed. So that means that the human factor from himself was totally blocked. It was locked down, okay? And that's what he learned, and that's what he applied. The thing is that when it all happened, when the first patient left the room, the doctor, which by the way was from the United States, the doctor told him not to do that. We are supposed to be a team. There is the patient, there is you, and there is me, and we have to work together, okay? So the patient has to feel comfortable in this room. The patient has gone through a hard time already, and it is our job to give comfort to this patient, to people who comes into this room. So he was a little bit in shock after that. He didn't know how to react. So the doctor just gave him the guidelines to look at the person in the eyes, not to look at to the floor, but in the eyes, and to talk to him in first person, not in third person, but in first person. The doctor is saying this, and if you have something to say, if you have something to give from your own on yourself, you can also do it. The first patient left, and people kept on coming. Each case was more tragic than the other one, and it was a little bit complicated for him, as he told me. I must say that the interview wasn't like a regular interview. It was more like a master class, where he basically gave me all of his experience. It was amazing, and I must say that somehow it fueled my willingness to volunteer myself whenever I have the chance and the opportunity, the means to go. But going back to the main point, when the second patient and the rest of the patients came, he began to loosen a little bit, and he began to be part of the room. He began to be there, to be present. There was this old lady. She might have been in her 80s, and she had this situation about water and light. Of course, she was homeless at the point, and the doctor touched her shoulder, and she felt so uncomfortable. That's what the Dr. Nevares told me, that he could see from the lady, from her expression, that she was very uncomfortable. So I don't know how to say that in English, but somehow he grabbed the situation on his hands. He asked for permission to the doctor. He asked to permission to talk to her. And the thing is that she was asking for more help, because there are some things that the Puerto Rican government, sort of speaking, have limited. For instance, in the Social Security, you have one doctor and one only doctor assigned. If by any chance the doctor is not available, or you don't like that doctor, you don't have a plan B, you have to go private. So that was the situation of this lady. And he just, Dr. Garcia grabbed her hands and he talked to her, and she began crying. She let herself go and she began crying. And he said that at that point, at that moment when he had this experience with her, he understood what the doctor meant in the first place. You have to be there, because there is something that even if you try to give as a doctor, you cannot fully give, because you don't understand. You don't speak the same language. And even if you do, there are things that culture embraces that, since you do not belong to that culture, you cannot share it the same way. You don't have the same ways of feeling, the same ways of experiencing. Besides, of course, Dr. Garcia was also a victim of Hurricane Maria, so he fully understood what this woman was going through. Afterwards, many other patients came around, and there was another case that shocked him the most. It was about a young lady. She was under 18, actually, and she was a student at the university in San Juan. And the hurricane swept everything, including her residency where she lived. And she was homeless. He asked her why she didn't sleep in the tents that were placed for refugees. And she had been the subject of an attempt of rape, so she preferred being on her own. She went to the practice to see the doctor because she had some breathing problems, as well as some problems in her private parts. His husband, Dr. Nevares' husband, happens to be a gynecologist, and the doctor in practice, the doctor who was in the room at the moment, gave her a $20 bill, and she refused. So he stepped in, and he explained what she should do with that money, why she should take that money, and he gave her his personal phone number just in case she needed extra help. And actually she did. She gave him a call back, and she talked to him because where his husband works, there is also a psychologist. So she managed to talk to the psychologist as well. So basically, what he meant with all of this, what I came from as a result from all of these questions and answers he gave, the questions were intertwined in such a way that it was more like a storytelling than I don't know how to say that in English, a discourse, you know? So it was more like a storytelling, a masterclass, something that made a bond. And the way he expressed about all of this is that, yes, culture does make a difference. Culture does represent some sort of bridge that we must cross in these specific situations, because when people suffer these situations, these natural catastrophes, we're not prepared for this. And it breaks you down. Most of the time when you see that out of nowhere, you have nothing left of what you've been working for your entire life, all of your savings, not to mention if you lost family or close friends and everything, that breaks you down. There is this human factor that we must bear in mind, and that it must be taken into account at the moment of doing these kind of interpretations. Human factor is a humongous factor, and it does make the difference. Some aspects to bear in mind. The policies, as I said before, the Puerto Rican government in the Social Security, they assigned one only doctor. If you're not comfortable with a doctor, or if by whichever reason the doctor is not available at that time, you have no plan B. There is no second possibility. So it is important to know that many of the times people have to go to another resource of help, to another source, not resource, source of help, because they have to go on. Another thing we have to bear in mind is the need versus the orthodoxy. There is a need of human touch. There is a need of contact. There is a need of bonding. There is a need of feeling understood, feeling appreciated, feeling that you're not alone on what just happened. And there is an orthodoxy that is what we've been taught, the invisibility, the stay on the margins, stay away from the situation, be there, but don't be there. So there is this question, this bifurcation, this situation that interpreters must decide in the moment they are working there. Because one thing, of course, is what we see in our classrooms, where while we are training, one thing is what we live as interpreters in a booth or over the phone, and another thing completely different is being there, where you can see the human being, where you can understand by seeing the how do you say it in English? Oh my God, I forgot. The human, the body talk, how the body is speaking. It's only there where you can actually see that people need that affection. People need to be understood and be loved. In that moment, people need to be loved. So there is also some kind of psychological help that we are not prepared to give because we are interpreters, we're not psychologists. So maybe if we could have some sort of component while having our education, some sort of component in these specific cases for natural catastrophes that could indicate us, besides being a cultural mediator, what to do in these cases. What should you do when the person next to you breaks down and starts crying, sobbing, that you cannot even understand what the person is saying? But what should you do? What's the procedure to follow? And the distrust, what I said before, the patients, these patients, Dr. Nevares talked to me about, many of them were afraid, were not afraid, but they didn't understand, even if they knew I'm sorry, even if they knew I'm sorry means lo siento in Spanish, they feel this connection. They don't feel that bond you should feel. I don't know if it has ever happened to you. I'm from Venezuela and I live in Madrid. And I go to the psychologist myself, not because I'm crazy, but because that's another thing. That's another personal thing. But the thing is that my psychologist is from Venezuela, because I believe that many of the times there are expressions and there are things that I need to say in my very own language. And even if I speak with somebody who is from Spain, and it's the same language, there are nuances, there are things that they might just, okay, yeah, I understand you, but it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make the difference that should make, you know? So the conclusions I got to this is basically that we must keep in mind that there is this cultural factor besides the language barriers that we have to somehow try to surpass. We have to narrow that gap, because there is a lot of information. In this case, it was information for the patient, but in many other cases, it's about saving lives at that moment. When you don't understand what the person is telling you, you don't understand things. People might be dying at that very moment in those crises, in those situations, those crisis situations. So basically that is it.